Hey, thanks for making it to Veterans Preference. We are glad you made it. We got some great topics today, and I want to pass it over to Chris. But before I do, please hit the thumbs up, subscribe, share with a friend, all that good stuff. It really does help the channel grow and get this into the hands of those that need it. So with that, Chris, what do we got today?
Hey, we're going to be building on the resume session that we did, and we're going to talk about, okay, if you do that and do that well, and you get that opportunity to sell yourself personally, whether it be by Zoom or interview. There's lots of different types of interviews. We're gonna spend a little bit of time talking about the different types of interviews, how to prepare for them, and how to knock it out of the park. Then we're going to talk a little bit also about the knock it out of the park piece, which is talking in the customer's language. And so obviously when you're doing a search for work and you're picking up a little bit about a lot of places because you're trying to get your resume out there, you may not have the time to go deep, but once you start getting into the discussions phase, you need to go a little bit deeper again, so you could show that you could connect the value that you bring to the business outcomes that they're trying to drive. And then should we have enough time, we're going to talk a little bit about the art of networking. And we could probably do a 10-piece series just on networking, but we're going to cover some things on the surface that are things that you just got to know as you start putting yourself out there. Anything to add, Randy?
No, I'm ready to jump in. I think today's episode is going to be awesome, and so I'll kick it back to you, Chris, and we can talk about the types of interviews a veteran might experience when they're transitioning.
Perfect. Well, the word interview can encapsulate lots of different things. It could be an interview that's more in the formal nature, right? So you applied, they're interested, they're going to set you up for a phone screen or a Zoom screen, or they're going to send you a survey and they want you to fill out more information. We'll talk about that type of interview, but we'll also talk about the more informal kinds, the ones that because of your hustling, you're going to try to get coffee with folks. You're going to try to connect with other veterans who have made the transition, and you're going to be asking them for time. And I want you to know that time is the most precious commodity that we all have, right? So the key learning, if there's one takeaway that we want to leave with you, is that make time precious. Get the most out of it that you can when you get the break of getting the opportunity to speak to somebody. That means you got to do your work ahead of time. And then there's also the piece around following up. The second piece of information that I think we want you to leave with today is that it's never too old school to drop a handwritten note, right? They go a long way. And we're going to talk about other things that stick out in the people's minds that A, tell them that you're doing the work to make sure that your value proposition is heard, and B, that you're going to continue to do the things. So when people put their brand on the line for you, or people try to advocate for you, or people are going to spend their time to help you get through a process or help connect you to other people, that it's worth it. All right. So there was a lot there. Let's just talk about different types of interviews. Jason, we've all done interviews, both as on the candidate side and as the employer side.
Right.
What type of interviews stick out to you, Jason?
You know, I like that you brought up kind of that twofold aspect when it comes to interviews. Sometimes you will have these non-formal or informal type of interviews where you've actually networked, and I'm a big fan of networking, so I'm really hoping we get to that in this, because I love the whole idea of networking and having those informal interviews along the way, because they're feeling you out like you're feeling them out. Now, when it comes to the more traditional interviews, being prepared is the most important thing. Everybody gets the jitters. Everybody's a little bit nervous. But the more that you do a little bit of research on the company, the more that you reach out via LinkedIn or other networking means and pick up a little bit about the culture or some of the hot points that company or maybe that position is looking for, right? Some of the things that are needed for that specific position, you can incorporate those into your answers. And what I've noticed is when it comes to an interview, the more prepared you are with some general responses to questions, the more you're able to leverage those answers that you kind of have in your quiver of arrows you can interweave those to answer like 7 different variations of a question. So as long as you have a few different key points where you can answer them, you're going to be good to go and be able to interweave that in. It's the person that doesn't do the homework that feels like they're on their heel. The two things that the 2 pieces of advice I'm going to give real quick, and then I want to kick it over to Randy, is one, make sure that you have that first question nailed down. That first question is typically so let's break the ice. Tell me a little bit about yourself. So
Yeah.
I was born in, and nobody cares about where you were born. So, you need to work on having a very good answer for that, something that leaves them wanting more. When I interview, and every time I've ever interviewed, I envision, we're usually sitting across a table. And what I envision is I need to move my way over to the same side of the table as the people I'm interviewing with. We're on the same side of the table. We're not talking at each other. We're talking with each other about the vision of this position and the company's direction. So with that, Randy, go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, traditional interviews, right? So typically a one-on-one format, sometimes a two-on-one format, but you kind of know what you're going to get when you go into a traditional interview. So what I'd say for a transitioning service member, to kind of dovetail with what Jason just said, is try to anticipate the questions that you think that this employer is going to ask. And you're going to have probably anywhere between 45 minutes to maybe on the high end, an hour and a half to interview. Probably sweet spot's about 60 minutes. So that's going to lend itself to, maybe 8 to 10 questions with a decent response in there. What I recommend veterans do is try to guess what those questions are going to be. You're not going to get them all, but I would say you're probably going to be able to guess about a third of them. Those are going to be simple questions. Like Jason said, tell me a little bit about yourself. Why do you want to work for this company? What interests you about this particular job? So those are things you can anticipate and have some notes pre-written for, so you can really speak articulately when the question comes up. Kind of the next third of questions are things you can get close. You might be able to estimate what the interviewer wants within reason, but maybe not know the exact wording. So that's fine too. Try to get some answers put together for that. And then probably about a third of the questions are going to be things that you may not anticipate, but you can have answers prepared for, to Jason's point, that are sort of relevant. And I want to throw this out there for our military folks, because we hear this a lot, but focus on the STAR method. So that's situation, task, action, and result. And when you get an interview question that you didn't see coming, if you can speak to a specific situation in your military career, and then you can talk about the task at hand, the actions you took, and then the results that came from your actions, that's going to be able, you're going to be able to answer a ton of questions that way in a really articulate manner. So that's kind of my thoughts on the traditional interview and how to prep for it. But I'll kick it over to you, Chris. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to build on a couple of things that both of you said. One of the things around interview questions is there's also different types of interview questions. There are theoretical questions, case study types of questions, where they say, here's a situation, what would you do, right? Mm-hmm. They're trying to really look at several different things: how you think, how you react to pressure. They're looking to see how you construct what Randy was explaining in STAR, or in the previous episode, we took STAR and took it down to SAO, situation, action, outcome. Whatever way that you're given that answer, you want to construct it. Here's the situation. In a theoretical interview question scenario, they're giving you the situation, and then they're asking you to construct what actions would you take, how would you plan to go after something like this, who you engage with, how do you disseminate decision making, those types of things, and then what the desired outcomes would be. There's a behavioral question, which is, tell me about a time when. Now, one of those questions could trip you up if you don't actually have experience doing the exact thing that they're asking you.
Right.
And trust me, there's a lot of really well-intended managers out there that forget that You haven't done some of these things before, but you should be prepared. And goes to Jason's point about you should be prepared, and you should have a construct in your head. So even when you get tossed one where it kind of catches you by surprise, or you haven't actually done it, you could quickly go to things that you have in your resume, or quickly go to things that you've done and say, listen, I haven't done something exactly like that, but let me tell you about a situation that's very similar, right? So you have theoretical questions, you have behavioral questions, and then you have the questions that you got to just be prepared for, which are the standard questions. Tell me about yourself. Tell me about what you're looking for. Tell me a little bit about your military experience. Tell me about why you're interested in this company, et cetera, et cetera. You just got to be prepared. There's another thing that you guys were talking about that triggered something in my mind about the preparation piece, which is on Glassdoor, people will go and basically say, here's the interview questions that they asked me for this particular role. It's not all inclusive, not all jobs are in there, but there are places where you could go and you could research probably best solutions. And even if you have to kind of come up with your own answers based upon stuff that they've asked other people in the past. With that, I'm going to ask Randy first and then have Jason, like, where do folks go to prepare? So we're talking about preparing, we're talking about having your data. So you have and now you have this construct of how to answer things. But where does that data come from? Randy, let's go to you first. We'd already just mentioned Glassdoor is one potential place.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it lies in the obvious, your resume. So you want to make sure you can speak to everything that you put on paper in front of that person that's interviewing you. And then you're asking about preparation. Just a quick answer that I'd give you is phone a friend. So get somebody, be it somebody in your household, somebody in your family, one of your friends, have them sit down with you, prep them with the questions that you anticipate this person will ask. And then, kind of have them critique, have them walk you through those questions and practice interviewing. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing a practice interview. You're going to be more comfortable when you go into that real deal interview if you practice a little bit. You know your resume, you know the situations you've been in, you feel ready to ask the questions or answer the questions and move forward. So those would be kind of my two answers. And the other thing is, it's okay to have notes in an interview. Sure, you've got your resume, you have it printed out, the employer has it printed out, and that's good. But you know what? Good old-fashioned piece of paper where you've prepped the battlefield a little bit with some additional notes, and you can get to those quickly, I think is a great way to prepare. I like to color code things. When I do an interview, I like to have certain areas of my career color coded so I can find them quickly, look at them for a second or two, and then answer the question while looking at the interviewer in the eye. So that's my take. I'll kick it over to you, Jason.
All right. So for me, if I was to go have an interview tomorrow, I would dust off the job requisition because I'm going to want to speak to everything within that as much as I can and kind of read between the lines and really get a feel for not only what they're looking for, but why they're looking for it. Sometimes, depending on this position and company, right? It's a people thing. Some recruiters will make these very elaborate job postings, job requisitions, and there is a lot of information in there. This is not a closed book test, right? You have all the information you need there. In addition, I'd look at the website for the company. I would go into their mission statement, about us, who we are, who the leadership is, who, what their backgrounds are. Maybe one of them is military, whatever. And depending again on what kind of a role you're going for, maybe you might not be that far removed from the upper crust of that company, and you'd want to be able to kind of chime in lightly. Chris, was with the Navy, or in some cases, you're going to interview with these people, and I've done that before in the past. Just a light reference. It shows that you did your due diligence and that you're actually taking it serious. I will say, this is going to sound weird. Don't overthink it. Don't be somebody you're not. Be authentic. Be yourself. be a good version of yourself and be the best you can be, but be authentic. Because if you sell them on something that you're not, one, you're going to have to hold that up, and you're going to hate your life. So be authentic, right? Just be yourself, and it takes the pressure off, right? It goes back to, at least this is for me, and maybe it doesn't work for everybody, but for me, again, if I'm sitting at an interview table, I'm trying to create a relationship with these people, not just this back and forth. I'm trying to visually see myself on the other side of the table, sitting next to them, and being authentic helps to do that, and it lowers down the stress, right? One of the things that I wanted to talk about, Chris, is we all here have interviewed hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. I mean, maybe more. I don't know. I don't know if I've hit the 1,000 mark, but I've interviewed quite a lot of folks in my time. And I will tell you, and I'm guessing that you guys are the same, we might have some pet peeves as interviewers. Like, oh my God, the person leaves the interview room and you're like, you look at the other people on the panel and you're like, I can't believe had to sit through that, right? So you have to think about what you're leaving as an impression on these people, right? So again, it goes back to the authentic, have a conversation. I mean, these are people, you're all one team, one fight, trying to make this thing happen. And you can be a little bit motivated and you could be yourself. So what I'd like to see is, what are a couple of your pet peeves, Chris, when it comes to somebody who you're interviewing and you're like, this person is just totally going downhill fast? Because I think we can learn from that, right? These are some things we shouldn't do, right? So I'd like to hear that, Chris.
Yeah, look, number one, people who come in unprepared, right? If you come in late, or you come in without questions, or you're there and you're expecting the interviewer to drive everything, or the person that you're speaking to drive everything, that's kind of a pet peeve. If your first question, and if you don't have questions, like, you're not going anywhere after this. Like, if you haven't done anything to help me help you, I'm not wasting any more time on you. And that's no matter who the candidate is or where they come from. And the wrong questions are just as bad. Hey, can you tell me a little bit about your company? No, we have a website. Like, this isn't the 70s anymore, right? There's a website. I would expect you to actually do some diligence. I would expect you to go understand how we make money and have questions about it. I would expect you to go do your research and understand what industry are we in. What is one of the things that candidates can do is they can go to Yahoo Finance and look up the company, and then look up SAIC code, which will tell them the industry code. And that tells you all of the competitors. And you could start doing some research on, what is the marketplace? What is the company's mission and vision? How are they doing? What challenges are they having? And this all comes back to you being able to help that company move their business forward and delivering on the outcomes. And so I would say the lack of preparedness tells me that you're really not that interested. The second thing that was a pet peeve of mine is when people, because this is you could get beat up in the interview process, right? It's hard to put yourself out there. It's hard to not get interest when you could do a job. It's just hard, and it screws with you mentally, physically, and it could really deteriorate your hope. If you come in all beaten up and battle weary, I'm going to help you, but I'm not going to help you get a job at my company. Right?
Right.
Because there's a high risk of failure. If you've lost hope and you've lost that ability, like if you come in asking for charity, please give me a job, I'm at my wit's end, nobody else wants to hire me. First thing that's going to come to my mind is like, there's probably a reason for that. Now, I'm going to help you, and I'm going to try to motivate you. I'm going to try to get you, ready to have the right conversation. But I'm not presenting you to anybody in my company until I know you're in that right state of mind, right? And a lot of that comes back to that preparedness piece, right? So those are a couple of things that really tweak me. How about you, Randy?
I'll give you 3. I'm going to give you 2 general ones, and I'm going to give you 1 specific for the military, veteran, and spouse community. So first one, If you have somebody that doesn't make eye contact in an interview, that's a concern to me. If they are not engaged, they're not having a conversation with you, they're not willing to make eye contact, I'm going to have some questions about that person right off the bat. So my advice is kind of like Jason said, kind of like you said, Chris, be in the moment, be there with that person, try to envision yourself working with that person. And that means having a conversation like a normal human and, make eye contact, be polite, and answer the questions. So that's the first one. The second one is the distracted interviewee. So if you have an interviewee that's always on their phone, looking down, checking their texts, not present in the moment, their mind is, on their device and then, half the time with you in the conversation, that's a concern to me. So my advice is turn off your phone before you go into the interview. I don't mean put it on silent. I don't mean put it on vibrate only. I mean, just turn the damn thing off or leave it in your car.
But Randy, that's where I have the interview. Like, I'm listening to you guys. You're telling me to do all this preparation, come up with all these great questions, but that's where I have them. Like,
right? Get a pad of paper, bring it into the interview, turn your phone off, folks. Because when I interview people and they're halfway into their phone or into Instagram or whatever else they're doing in their virtual life and not paying attention to the questions I'm asking, it's a real concern. And then this one's really for the military community out there. I think the first two can go to anybody, but the jargon thing and the lingo and the acronyms thing. Folks, we've talked about this in other reviews, but I need you to sanitize that. I need you to spell it out in plain language, because if you use jargon, they may not take the time in the interview to clarify. There's times when somebody is so jargony with me, I don't take the time to clarify. I just move right on to the next question. So responses should be in plain language, and ideally language that's crafted to meet that business's mission, needs, and intent. So translate military lingo, jargon, and acronyms into that employer. Spend 5 minutes on it. Divest yourself of all those jargons, and I think you're going to be in a lot better spot. Take a minute here, guys. There's one topic that comes up when we interview people, and I get a lot of questions on it. So I want to throw this out to the team. I'm going to throw it to Jason first, and then I'll move on to Chris. But nowadays, we tend to see a lot more panel interviews, and panel interviews are things that us in the military can be familiar with. A lot of times when we interview for positions in the military and need to move up, a panel interview is part of it. So Jason, I want to kick it over to you. When a veteran, a spouse, somebody transitioning is going to that interview, and it's not that traditional interview we talked about at the beginning, but it's a panel interview. How do they prepare? How do they become successful in that moment?
That's a great question. So you want to do all the same things that you did for preparing in general. You might have a list of the people that are going to be on the panel. It's important to understand where these people fit into the food chain with regard to your position. There might be somebody there that you will never deal with and has nothing to do with you. They just needed to fill the spot for the panel. That's cool. It's nice to know that. It's nice to know the ones that actually are going to be part of your food chain and the people that you're going to have to deal with and work with, either as almost a peer or a direct reporting up line. So that way you can articulate it, your answers a little more appropriate, and I would say frame them for the recipient if you can remember the names, right? It can get hard, right? I think I've done a panel with like 5 people before. So, it can get hard to remember the names, but if you do have them up front, and you're able to do that, and you have your notepad, notepads have never been a negative for me. I'm always happy to see somebody who's taken it seriously. And that's usually the feeling that I have when I see somebody, do you mind if I take notes? Or I jotted down a couple things. I just want to make sure I didn't forget. Is that okay? They're respectful and nice, and I enjoy that. So I would say with the panel, the other thing is look around at the room, right? You can't just keep staring at the one person that you feel familiar with and you're comfortable with. You have to look at everybody in your answer. So, Randy's going to ask me a question. I'm looking intently at Randy. Now I'm going to answer. I start to answer with Randy. I'm going to scan the room, giving each person a minute, well, maybe less than a minute, but give each person 5 or 10 seconds, right? And then I'm going to loop back to Randy, and I'm going to wrap it up with Randy. That's my approach. Chris, what do you have for us?
Yeah, panel interviews are a little freaky. I mean, I've never been a big fan of panel interviews for, when I had the ability to influence a company's recruiting process. But sometimes they're really appropriate, especially if you're kind of on the like the university recruiting side, or you're at an open house or a job fair, and you're trying to do a lot with the time that you have. And the reason why I'm not a big fan is because panel interviews can be great if all of the interviewers are really skilled and really trained. It's hard to get that two-way dialogue going like you would in a one-on-one or a two-on-one type of interview. And so I think it really only covers surface level stuff, right? The difference between, say, the panel interview I had when I was seeking my nomination for the military academy, where it was 4 people, and they just each had a question, and it just went down the line, and they weren't expecting a whole lot out of me to ask them questions. It was pretty much like a congressional, hearing where they said, "Tell me about this. What is your answer? Give me this." And so you just try to stay focused on giving them the best answer as crisply and as cleanly as you could. In my business experience, there's a lot more interaction even in panel interviews. And so one of the things that you might want to play with, and even do this with friends and do a mock setup, is to get comfortable in going from whoever's asking the question, and then trying to build on some of the answers involving other people that, hey, just like Jane had asked, Michael, thank you for that question. I'm going to say, building on what I spoke to Jane about, here's some additional context. And then don't be afraid to wrap things up and say, hey, here's a few things I want you to know about me. Here's some things I heard from the questions. Here's some things that I'm taking back as notes to do a little bit more research. Thank you for your time. So there's maybe a little bit more formality, and the ability to have some facilitation capability to get the most out of that, right? So you just don't feel like you're a deer in the headlights. Certainly those facilitation techniques are great in any interview. It's just easier when it's one-on-one or
right.
two. Yeah. We talk about the jargon, and even the companies have jargon, right? And so if you're on a side where they ask you something and you don't understand what they're asking, take the time to say, hey, could you explain that to me? That I'm not familiar with that nomenclature. Don't just try to answer it based upon what you think it is.
Right.
Right. And so, I mean, I've worked at companies where it was kind of like the military, where we kept a glossary of all of our jargon, right? Because the technology industry has all kinds of different nomenclatures and jargon. So, and I wouldn't expect a candidate to know all of it, but just be open that, and just know that there is that there. So we've talked about formal, informal interviews. We talked about things that, are good to know. Now, the interviews could come in lots of different capacities. We talked about panel interviews. We talked about face-to-face, one-on-one, two-on-ones. But there are interviews with third parties, like temp firms and or recruiting firms. And a lot of people coming out of the military might work with one of the military firms, like an Orion or a Lucas or Bradley Morris, are the ones that are out there. Yeah. There's also, in the way they do their interviews is a little different, right? More of the job fair type of interview, where it's a bunch of people, and then they give you a list of 8 people you're talking to that day, and they give you a little bit of background on who they are. And there's only so much that you could do to prepare for that. So you just really have to be comfortable with telling your value proposition, why you'd be interested in that type of role, and then just try to make the best out of it that you can. There's phone screens and phone interviews. There's all kinds of things that people may not call interviews, but are actually really interviews. And you just have to almost look at everything as an interview. And so you take it seriously. So if somebody says, hey, I have somebody I want to introduce you to, you should go have coffee with them, and you're doing that, and you're just getting to know them, and take it seriously and assume that it's an interview, because you are always being assessed, just like in the military, always being assessed.
Yeah, I want to just throw a quick point on that. When I would interview people, you know, in the office, typically they would arrive, they'd be greeted by a receptionist of some sort, they'd wait for a minute or two, and then come on back for the interview. I would always mention to the receptionist, hey, I'm expecting an interviewee to come in at a certain time. Tell me what you think. So to Chris's point, that receptionist or that first person that you see when you walk into the building may be somebody that's interviewing you, and you just don't realize it. Be polite and put yourself in their shoes. Is that somebody you want to work with? Ask them a few questions about their experience with the company and what they've got going on. But don't take that initial point of contact when you walk through the front door of a building as somebody that doesn't have a set of eyes on you. This is not intuitive for folks in the military. We're so used to the chain of command, and we're so used to rank mattering. It's a little different in the civilian world. So be polite and be kind to everybody, and realize that you're always on stage when you're going in for an interview, even if you're just walking in the front door.
Well said. I used to always ask either my talent acquisition coordinator and or the receptionist on what they thought of the interaction. And
right.
So, that's, again, as many data points as people can get is going to be helpful in the process. Now, there are different goals of interviews, right? I mean, so obviously if you apply to a job and they say, okay, well, we're interested, we want to talk to you. And whether it be a phone screen or an in-person or, whatever that next step would be, the goal is to kind of make it to the step after that. Right. And so, but a lot of times when you have these informal interviews, whether it's hey, I reached out to you on LinkedIn, you did what I did in the military, you're working for a company that I have interest in. Would you be willing to spend a little time with me, kind of thing? There are other goals associated with interviewing, and building your network is certainly a goal. Learning is certainly a goal. Maybe you end up with a mentor out of the process because you really connect with that person. Getting a referral into their company is a goal. Most companies have referral programs where if an employee refers somebody and that person gets a job, they get some sort of either a monetary reward or prize reward. So, or they just get the benefit of helping their company find great talent. So there's lots of different outcomes to these, especially the informal interviews. Jason, tell me a little bit about your experience with some of these more informal type of setups.
Right, sure. So, you nailed it. And I was thinking this the whole time, those situations where somebody reaches out to you, on LinkedIn, and next thing you know, they want you to come to, their Google office, right? And go have lunch and kind of just talk, right? Just get to know you. And like you said, all of these things are lining you up for a potential, in this case, an internal application for you. So these employers like Chris is talking about, not all of them, but the ones that are the super techie ones, right? They invest, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say that these big tech companies really try to find the best talent. And then when they do find that talent, they want that talent to refer their friends because they're probably super shiny too. So there is some incentive, and there is a whole other application track in some of these companies on the inside where they can actually apply for you. I've been to, a lot of these different companies and had these types of conversations with them. I would say you were dead on, Chris, with you need to treat every interaction with every single person as though it matters. Don't You're not there to, act crazy or act like you're better than anybody. It's very important that you're a team player in these environments, and taking the time to ask a couple simple questions to a receptionist could go a long way in your favor. I'm a big fan of that. I'm a fan of always learning. Right, you can learn something from the janitor through to the CEO. There's nobody knows it all. So when it comes to these kind of informal things, we're kind of teetering on the networking aspect, because a lot of times networking, either social or in person, social networking, internet type stuff, or in person networking, often can result in these types of kind of informal, let's take a look at who you are and how you could potentially fit with the organization. Before we get there, though, I wanted to, and I know I'm putting you guys on the spot, and if you don't have one, that's okay. Is there any interviews from your past that were quirky or kind of, and you is you're trying to go get the job and you're just like, whoa, this is like either super hardcore, or, they were throwing curveballs at you, or it was just totally unprofessional. What have you guys experienced in that world? And I'd love to share mine too. So, I'll go last. So either one of you.
Oh,
Randy?
I'll tell you, probably one of the quirkiest interviews I ever had was for my second CFO position. And it was a panel interview, and it was a big panel. They had, probably 10 or 12 people assembled, some of them from outside the company, all sort of at this big boardroom table. And then me, the applicant, was, seated at the end. And, human nature, when you got a lot of eyeballs on you, it kind of makes the hair in the back of your neck stand up. So I thought that was a little much. But, I kind of turned it around and tried to turn it into a positive. We went through the interview process. I tried to answer each, person's questions with direct answers, looking them in the eye, telling them what I knew about that particular question and how I could bring value to that company, which again isn't necessarily how folks from the military community approach answering questions. So I felt like it was going pretty well. And then, sort of at the end, I said, look, I recognize here that this is an interview where you're doing a lot of diligence. There's a lot of people putting eyeballs on me right now. And I just said, I applaud it, because if you're doing this amount of due diligence with me, you're doing this amount of due diligence with everybody you hire. And I applaud the effort, and that makes me want to work for this company, because you're making sure that you're bringing in good talent who are the right fit, who have the right, composure and the right temperament to be here. And so that was kind of how I tried to turn this massive panel interview into a positive. But that's me. I'll kick it back either to you, Jason, or Chris.
Go ahead, Chris.
So I laugh because I have lots of interview experiences that I look back on. Several of them were like pre-IPO Yahoo experience, where I just gotten promoted to manager, and I'm talking to the recruiter, and the recruiter says, well, would you consider coming back in as a recruiter? I'm like, hell no, I'm a manager. Same type of thing, pre-IPO Google, where, I got a question and I knew the right answer, but apparently that wasn't the right answer for the person who was asking the question. And that became pretty obvious. And then there was a funny story about LinkedIn that I'll tell in a future pre-IPO LinkedIn. And, the reality is that I was fully engaged and happy in the jobs that I was in. And one of the lessons is always take interviews, right? What I was turning down a lot of interviews because of ego or because of whatever. Maybe I was just too busy. But I've built my network over the years by going on interviews, staying open-minded. I didn't take it so far where I was wasting their time and I knew I wasn't going to take a job. But what you'll realize is that once you get in the work world and you have some experience underneath your belt, the experience plus veteran status is like so super powerful that people will want to talk to you. Take those. It's always important. You might, who knows, maybe you end up getting a new, better job. Or you just learn about other things and how other companies do things that you're doing. But the best scenario is that you're meeting people and you're building a network and you're presenting well. Some of the places where I haven't presented well is I've gone in and it was a job that I may not have had any experience doing. And I asked too many questions. I did my research. I knew what the company was doing, but I asked too many questions and it came across as me showing that I don't have that experience. And it's probably the way I asked the questions. And so, where it was more of a, hey, tell me about this, instead of, hey, I've noticed this. If I came into this job, here's how I would be thinking about it. Let's talk about whether or not that's the right approach, right? So there's a certain way of asking those questions. And then I've taken interviews like the pre-IPO Facebook interview where I was on top of my game and they asked me questions. I'm like, here's what you want to do. Here's how I'm thinking about it. In my experience, here's what happened. Here's immediately what I would say. I'd bring these people on board, would have a conversation. And that didn't go over very well. It made it look like I was a know-it-all answer. I had all the answers to everything. And they walked away saying, is this guy really going to be as flexible as we need him to be at a fast-growing startup that doesn't have as much infrastructure as the company that he's working for now? Now, the reality is that I just didn't present myself very well. And so I remember going into the chief people officer's we did a wrap up on the day and I went into her office and I said, if you are a company that is making decisions by committee, I doubt I'm getting this job. But if you're a company who understands that this is what was behind my answers, because I did not really click very well with this particular person, and I didn't get the job. Now, funny enough, they called me back 3 years later and talked to me about another job because I'd made a good enough impression. And I think when we talk about goals of the interviews and the networking associated with it, those are, so I didn't consider it a loss. It really wasn't where I wanted to spend my time at that point, because it would have I had young kids and they were growing so fast that I knew it would have been a 24/7 job. But at the same time, I did well enough, even though I bombed the interview with one person. I did well enough to where they thought about me the next time they had that opening. And so I consider that a win. And I still have people that I'm connected with and I reach out to on different occasions that I met on those interviews, and they've all gone off and run, their own shops somewhere else. And so you just have to play the long game. So one of the takeaways around this is, of all the things we're talking about, know that this is a long game that you're playing. And just because you don't get that job, or you don't get to go on to the next step in that job, how you handle yourself in that situation, people will remember. Now let's talk about that for a little bit. So you do all the hard work, you get the informational interview, or you get the phone screen, or you get a full-fledged interview and you become the second person. You're not the gold medalist, you're the silver medalist. Let's talk about ways to handle this and how you leverage the feedback and ask for feedback so you can continue moving forward. But like the professional way to handle this, so people at least will remember that person's going to go somewhere and I'm going to stay in touch with them. Let's talk about that. Jason, what's your thoughts?
Right. Well, first, I want to give my story, and then I think that the takeaways are important, right? So the takeaways are, you never know where opportunities are going to come from. Taking interviews just to kind of stay sharp on your interview game, I think, is a good thing, and the connections that you build in those interviews is important. I'm gonna throw out one thing, and then I'm gonna give my quick story. I was asked to be on an interview panel for another government agency, And I was, and we interviewed the people, and I gave my honest feedback at the end of it, and they decided that yeah, they didn't like any of the two final applicants, and so they stopped. They were using an outside firm who was also there, kind of monitoring the interview process, to open up the application, job rec, all that stuff. So they for higher level positions, sometimes they'll hire out a contract company, a headhunter, to help facilitate that. And sure enough, I get a phone call 3 weeks later saying, "Hey, we would love for you to apply for that position," right? Because I'm going, they should have hit this, they should have hit that, they screwed that up, and what they should have been focused on was this, and all the information's right over here, and da 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 da. And I spelled everything out that they were looking for, right? So I ended up applying, and then I pulled the plug on it. But the bottom line is you just don't know where opportunities are going to come from. So one of the funniest ones that I ever had, well, it's not really funny, but started off with a panel interview, did that, right? And it was just kind of a big round table. And so like any other panel interview, then I passed that, and then they go, "Okay, well, now we want you to do a presentation for us, and we'll email you the information that you're going to do this presentation on." Okay, when? The day before the presentation, and then you got to come in person and do this presentation. Okay, cool. So they email it to me, and it was for a recruiting manager job for Stanford University. And so I show up, I work up my little PowerPoint, right, my presentation, and I show up, and they go, "It's going to be in that room over there," and you could see like 30 people sitting in there. And then somebody comes up to me and starts putting a mic on me, and they're like, "Oh, and this is Joe. He's going to be filming in the back." And I'm like, wow, this is kind of a lot for this position, but okay. So they had all kinds of different folks there to watching. Anybody was invited to come watch this thing. So I did it. I ended up getting a job offer, but I ended up taking another job because I couldn't get to they're very stringent on how far they'll move their dollar figures. If you fall within a certain band, it's like it is what it is unless they rewrite it. So anyway, I walked away from that. But anyway, I thought that was a pretty amazing way to go through an interview process. So back to your question on hand, Chris, which I can barely remember at this point. So if you can ask it one more time so everybody's aware.
Let's talk about a little bit about the right way to ask for feedback and get the feedback that you need, because more times than not, you're not going to get it in most interview processes. And then how do you handle yourself, whether you get the job or not? Like, how do you get closure, but also maintain the opportunity to build relationships with those people later on?
Right. So for me, and then I'll pass it over to Randy, my quick version here is I always, if I'm really interested in that position or job or organization, right? Sometimes you're applying to things you might not be, which is a whole other topic, and you shouldn't really do that. So, but if I'm really interested in the role, I will create connections through LinkedIn with the people that would have been my boss. And in some cases, you'll end up getting their cell phones or email addresses through the hiring process, so you can kind of keep in touch there as well. The big thing is you don't want to seem like the stalker girlfriend, boyfriend, right? Because that can end badly. So you need to, be an adult about it, and be okay for the corrective feedback, whatever it may be. I've had that happen for a GS-15 job that I had applied for, and the guy called me back and said, "Hey, you were super solid, and you would have done great. It's just that the guy that was the position below that also applied, and he kind of already knows everybody." So, there's sometimes there's nothing that you can really do about it. It's just not in the cards that day. But being able to receive that feedback and being adult about it and going, "Yeah, no problem, man, I get it." You gotta, why build the airplane while it's taking off the track if you are taking off the runway if you already have one built, right? You're good to go, and I hope that works out great for you. Keep in touch, and a periodic touch and base doesn't hurt. I'm a fan of bringing something additional to the table, outside of me working for you. Hey, I know 15 people that are looking for that type of work, whatever it is. I'd love to refer them to one of your recruiters in that world, right? Maybe I'm applying for an HR role. Maybe my 15 friends are IT stuff. Hey, I got 15 IT friends that are super solid. Could I get them in contact with one of your recruiters? It shows an additional level of value that you bring and commitment to that organization. So I'm a fan of doing those little things. It's just kind of fun for me. I like to be that matchmaker sometimes. So if I'm not the one that's getting in there, I like to be able to bring some other value.
Yeah, and look, I would double down on that for sure. And that's how you stick out from all the other candidates. And B, there's a vested interest. They may not tell you all of the feedback that they have for you right then, but if you maintain those relationships and that you build trust, you might call them back in a month, even just to say, hey, did you guys fill that job yet? I'm still interested. If you're, because sometimes that happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
But building trust and building credibility and showing them a level of maturity and professionalism, you actually get a little bit more honest feedback. I mean, giving feedback is hard. Most people can't take direct, honest feedback when it means they're not getting the job. They're certainly a lot more open to feedback when they're moving on to the final stage or getting the job. The other thing is there are risks associated with it. It's not that the companies are doing anything illegal, but there are risks of giving people information about why they didn't make it, because they might take that in a different direction. It's because I'm this, or it's because my religion, and some of that could be true, but it gets you nowhere, honestly. So, and you wouldn't want to work for a place that's going to discriminate you like that anyway. So the reality is, and look, I'm over 50, and I know others are kind of getting there. Ageism is a real thing. I've seen it. I know it. I've experienced it. It just doesn't help you get a job if you keep throwing up those reasons why people are discriminating against you. The most important thing is let's understand how I can do what I need to do better next time. Please offer me the professional feedback that I can noodle. Did I answer this question the right way or the wrong way? Or, give me some of the things that I could use to help me get my next job. And most people will throw you some bones there, right? And so again, it comes back to trust, credibility, and professionalism. Randy, build on top of that, please, or any other ideas around this topic.
Yeah, first technique that I want to throw out there for our military viewers is kind of figuring out where you're at in the process. You might conclude the interview and not know if you're going to get it, an offer or another interview, or if you're going to be passed over. So one of the techniques that isn't often used in the military, but you can use in the civilian world if you feel like it's an appropriate question to ask is there anything standing in the way of you hiring me? That's a question you can throw onto the table, and it's roundabout enough to where they don't feel like they have to give you a yes or no, you're hired, but they can tell you a little bit more about where they're at in the process. So that's a technique that you can use. Another technique military folks can use if they don't get the job and they want to get some of that feedback to improve, to Chris's point, employers can be a little bit guarded with that information. They don't want to get sued because they didn't hire somebody for X, Y, or Z reason and possibly get an equal opportunity lawsuit thrown their way. But you can ask a question like, what can I do to improve my credentials, improve my, work history, improve my education, whatever it may be, to get me to this position the next time a job like this is available? So what you're trying to do is just figure out what the gap was, figure out where the candidate that was successful is, and where you're at. And that's okay. I mean, hey, you might need to get that master's degree. Right now, we saw you with a bachelor's, you had all the right experience, but we need just a little bit more education. And sure, that's a year and a half, 2 years worth of education you got to go after, but at least you know where you stand, or whatever the reason is. But understand the gap and know the gap. So those would be kind of my two things that I'd throw out there for our military and spouse and veteran community watching. Jason, you got anything?
Can I build on that a little bit, Randy?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. So, and now I'm going to actually build a little bit on. So Jason talked about standing out and making sure that people remember you. Randy talked about good follow-up questions, and you can't be scared to ask where you stand. You can't be scared to say, hey, what are the primary decision factors? Or many times there's a rubric that companies will be looking for. And your question around, okay, we've been through the process. I know that these things were important considerations. Do you feel like you have all the data that you need from me? Is there anything else that I can provide from you to you, either through different work or professional experiences, or even references? And we'll get into like the importance of references and having the right references and managing your reference pool, and not just saying, hey, would you be a reference? And then you give them the phone number and they don't know what they're referencing you on. Your job is to make sure that you're keeping the interviewers and the recruiting folks up to date on everything that they need to know about you, as well as the people who are going to be validating, yes, this person does have these skills. Yes, here's my personal experience seeing them in action. Yes, they're of high moral character and fiber. Every reference is going to say that, but the references who can give explicitly the examples and the details that they need, backing up your story that you just told them, is super, super important. So any other thoughts on that topic?
I want to throw in there that it's important to understand that there are cases in which a candidate, not you, another candidate, has networked, rubbed elbows, volunteered, stepped up, was a benefit to the organization in some extra sort of way, and then they were told to apply for that job, and they did. And they have to go through the motions of opening up a job rec and hiring, go through the interviews and all of that stuff. But it's a 90% chance that the person who was referred to apply, hey, look, you need to apply because I really want to hire you. We all do it. I've done it. I handpicked certain people I needed to fill my spots. And when you can do that, you win. But how do you get to know these people? It just didn't show up out of nowhere, right? They were leaning forward. They were putting out the feelers with me, just like I was putting feelers out with them. So don't get your feelings hurt if you don't get the job and you feel like you killed it and you did a great job. You probably did. But you're an unknown commodity, where this other person who maybe they volunteered there, maybe they had different meet and greets, maybe they had some more exposure and they were able to give some sort of taste of who they are and what they bring to the table. So just wanted to kind of throw that out there for you, Chris. So we'll go ahead.
Go ahead, Randy.
Be aware that not all interview questions are weighted equally. Just because you got 10 questions doesn't mean each one's worth 1 point. I have one particular question that I ask towards the end of all interviews that I give, and I'll share with the viewers here. And it's important to me. I want to understand where a person's areas for improvement are, and those are areas that we can work on as a team, and we can build on them. You might smoke an interview, you might have every single question absolutely dialed for me, but if I don't know how we can bring you onto the team and make you better, it's going to be something that's a question mark in my mind. So I always ask, towards the end of an interview, when I contact your previous employer and ask what areas of your employment need improvement, what am I going to learn and why? And a lot of times that throws candidates off. But if you can be prepared to answer that question, you're going to be able to tell that employer, this is how you make me better. I'm already good. You're taking the time to interview me. You know that I'm at least somewhat qualified and a pretty decent applicant. Here's how you get me to that next level to make me a real awesome employee. If I get somebody that can smoke that question and tell me this is what I need to do to improve, and here's how I'm going to do it in your organization, and I'm going to grow, and I'm going to bring value, and I'm going to help you profit. It's going to go a long way with me. So that's kind of my last piece. And I gave away one of my secret interview questions. So if interview or ever interviewed by me, you know that one's coming.
Yeah, I think it's important to have, and this kind of brings back, kind of to the interview and interview questions. We always think that we have to tell about all of our success stories, right? And certainly the majority of the interviews will be around things that you've accomplished. But there's also the questions around tell me about a time when you fell short of your own expectations or your boss's expectations. Tell me about something where you failed miserably. And what they're really looking for is that you're self-aware and that you're reflective. But I always look for, I don't really care about unless it's something unethical or, immoral or something that would immediately disqualify them from being hired. What I'm looking for is, how did they go about, what did they learn? How did they go about learning and putting better practices in place? And the next time something like that happened, was there a better outcome? Right. And so that's something to be aware of and something to be ready for. These are tough questions to actually, you don't want to have them too prepared, so it feels like it's right off the cuff, because then they're going to go, this person's kind of a professional interviewer. I don't know if I could really trust that story was real or not. But be ready to answer some of those questions, especially, and we maybe this is a topic for another day for a deep dive, but there are some people who are going to be having much higher hurdles if you didn't leave with an honorable discharge, or you spent some time in the clink, or you have a background that you're not proud of that you're trying to overcome. It's going to be even higher hurdles for you. And Jason, maybe we could take that down as something that we can dig into a little bit later on in one of our other series.
Absolutely. And just to throw out there, just a quick, because it was mentioned, if anybody is listening to this, who maybe they have a dishonorable discharge or what have you, there are ways in which you can get your character of discharge upgraded. One of the best examples out there is you were doing great. You went overseas, you were in theater, you saw something, now you got PTSD, but you don't really know it. And now, and then you punch out your commander, right? So you weren't getting the PTSD treated, and therefore this was the consequence, right? And then you ended up getting bad paper, and then you got pushed out. Well, now the military, DOD, and the VA, quite frankly, together both look at that as, we probably could have did something to have prevented that and provided care that was needed to get this person back on track. So there are character of discharge upgrades available. So anyway, how about we, for the sake of time, how about we move over to a little bit of recruiting, not recruiting, networking. Yeah. Let's do a little of that, and then we'll wrap it up.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we've woven in quite a bit about different ways to network and making sure that you're really taking advantage and you're being professional and you're following up, and don't look at things as just an interview for a job. Look at building longer term relationships, etc. But when we talk about this concept of networking, let's talk about where veterans and their loved ones can actually start, because it can be very overwhelming to know where to even start. We could do a little roundtable and just say ideas as they come up, but I'm going to chum the waters a little bit, especially in larger civilian enterprises, and certainly in most decent sized even government organizations and not for profits. They have communities of veterans that they call either employee resource groups or employee networks. And so, and again, you should be willing to reach out at any stage of your transition process. Better early than when you're looking for a job, even though you may not have that specific job to talk about. There are things to talk about, like what should I be thinking about ahead of my transition, etc. But reach out to those folks in person on LinkedIn, maybe through if you went to a 4-year or 2-year college and they have alumni networks, and that folks have spent time in ROTC or spent time in active duty or a guard, whatever. Reach out to people that you know and start asking questions, good questions, but leverage those people that are in these employee networks, whether you know them or not, because they understand your story. And from there, you start building that relationship. Jason, go.
So I'll throw out two. There's a lot that can be covered in this, and I'm going to, I'll circle back the next go around to give some more. Here's two. Contact your local chamber of commerce, find out when they're having a mixer, right? You show up, it's a bunch of typically smaller businesses, but it's businesses none the same. Let's be honest, throughout the nation, there's plenty of small towns, and that's where you're going to get to meet the folks that are actually running the businesses in the town. So your chamber of commerce mixers are always good to get out there and network and meet folks. And then the kind of in the same vein, you'll have the different clubs and so forth, like the Lions Club or Moose Lodge, or even the American Legion and the VFW and all that type of stuff, right? So, and half of them, I don't even know how to say them. With the little purple hat, and it's starts with the Q. I don't know. Anyway,
Kiwanis?
Yes. So there's tons of those, and it's almost like a second mission of them is taking care of each other and helping each other, lift up and rise. Masons would be a good example as well. So utilizing those types of organizations, I'm going to throw this out there too. The best time to start networking for a job is when you don't need a job, right? So that's back to Chris's point. So the other thing is any networking event that is targeting veterans, okay? Recruiting event, anything, not LinkedIn, Vets in Tech, Chris.
Vets in Tech is a good one.
Does a great job with that. They'll host these kind of recruiting networking events with, a handful, maybe 4, 5, 6 different employers with a host employer there at their site. And there'll be, 3, 4, 5 recruiters from each one of these companies and little tables, and, maybe 30, 40, 50 veterans kind of meandering around and meeting folks and shaking hands and kissing babies. Here's my thing, and I'm going to double down on any networking event that's targeting veterans. The example here is Vets in Tech. Well, that is tech specific. Well, guess what? And I don't know if you're going to like this, Chris, but because for those that don't know, Chris is a co-founder of Vets in Tech. But here's my take on it, because I'm not the co-founder, is even if you don't want a job in tech, go to the networking event, meet people, shake hands, kiss babies, right? You'll meet a recruiter there. The recruiter is going to think that you want to get a job in tech, and you could say, no, but I know some people at my armory, if you're in the reserves or the National Guard, or I know some folks. I just wanted to be a resource for them and share this information, and then you mind if I get your number? Right? And then now all of a sudden you have a connection into that company that when you apply, you can reach out, right? So again, it goes back to you're bringing extra value.
Yeah,
right?
and Vets in Tech, those employers aren't all tech employers. They all are employers who have technology needs. Many of them would qualify as technology companies, but you have banks, you have power companies, you have. So this is where there's never any networking that's bad networking. Now, some networking is better than others, and you only have so much time. So I would think through that. But for example, Vets in Tech has their annual gathering on March 28th. and I believe this one's virtual as well. But so you have no excuse. You don't have to be in San Francisco for it. And all of these organizations that are seeking to, whether it be they have scholarships like the Tillman Foundation, there's so, and I know it gets overwhelming, but there are so many people out there doing great things to help veterans transition beyond just the people who have a company that is making profit, and there's nothing wrong with that, like the JMO transition services and the folks who help mostly JMOs or senior enlisted folks transition. But there's plenty of opportunity all the way around, whether it be job fairs, whether it be meetups, whether you just gotta, do a little bit of homework, use your network. Part of building your network, not just with people who have jobs, but people who are looking for jobs, is to make sure you're staying on top of all of this. And so it really is the buddy system to the nth degree, right? Now, you also find that there are, and Randy, I hope I'm not taking any of your ideas, but since I'm on a tear, I'm just going with it. Besides Vets in Tech, Vets in Tech does have a consortium of employers who are giving free or low cost training to veterans and loved ones who are interested in technology oriented careers. But there are other organizations like NPower, and the companies themselves who have some transition training or transition programs. Many of them will be connected through an apprentice program or a skill bridge or something like that. So again, it's very, very hard to know exactly where to go. Just start getting in the building the momentum in your search process, and you'll start uncovering all kinds of things that are super helpful. Randy, go.
Yeah, I got two. Jason kind of touched on one of them, and that's your veteran service organizations. So don't be afraid to reach out to your local VFW, your local American Legion, your local DAV, IAVA, whatever it may be. There's a ton of great, organizations out there that serve veterans. Take a few minutes, get to know your local chapter, get to know the folks there. That's a great way to start the networking process, get you comfortable with networking. Talking about what you did in the military, and good things can come of that. One we didn't cover here, but I want to throw out there because it's been a really powerful tool in my life, is don't forget, even if you're a veteran, to get involved with alumni networks. So I'm a proud graduate of Washington State University. I stay kind of involved with some of the alumni things that go on through that school. And, obviously within that university, there is a military community. So that's a great way to make connections within a connection and kind of build a close bond. So all of us have had some form of education. I recommend that you take a look as a transitioning service member at the alumni networks that are available to you and get involved. It's building that spider web of a network out. And those are two easy ways to do it. Service organizations, VFW, American Legion, and then alumni organizations. And that's what I got.
Yeah. And you'd be surprised. I mean, a lot of your old military units, if you look them up on Facebook, they'll have Facebook communities. So wherever there is community around, maybe people who went through basic training together or whatever, just don't hesitate to participate in them, but participate ahead of the need. Jason made a great point about local armories, or when way before every time you're coming home to visit family, whether you want to work there or not. Let's say you go visit friends in a city where you think, wow, Denver might be a place that I'd love to live at some point, and I'm going to go hang out at Randy's house. Every time you do that, pick one or two organizations, go meet up with people at a local armory, local VFW, local American Legion. Start putting yourself out there, build that network way ahead of the need. The other side to networking, I think this is my final point, is this is a pay it forward type of proposal. And believe it or not, even though you may not have a job yet, there are other things that you could do to help other people who are looking for jobs. And believe it or not, just like what Jason was talking about, there are things that you could do to help the companies, the interviewers or the people that you're just meeting during the recruiting process by referring friends or saying, hey, by the way, I noticed during the interview process that you guys don't really know a whole lot about our Navy nuclear program. And here's a few things that you should educate yourself on. And because there's, these folks might be a very good source of talent for you. It's all about giving back. It's not just about taking. There are times where we need to take a lot more than we give, but don't ever sell yourself short, because you always have something to give. Even if it's passing on goodwill or passing on things that you've learned to help other folks' journeys be a lot more fruitful than yours. Okay, so that's my last thought about all of this, and we could do further sessions on each one of these topics, but we crammed a lot in a very short period of time. That's my final thought. Jason, let's go to your final thought.
My final thought on this is make sure that your LinkedIn is dialed in. Don't have it splotchy and a piece here, a piece there, big gaps, all that stuff, if you're on the mode of trying to find a new job, because I guarantee you're going to get looked up. And especially if you're starting to do the networking things and all that stuff, you want to be able to give that information out and not be hesitant to do that. So make sure that your LinkedIn is squared away. At least enough to where it's up to date and somewhat cohesive. With that, we'll feed it over to Randy.
Hey, final thought is start translating now. So go back from the time you entered the military or the time you became a military spouse and look at all of those experiences that you have. Get all those acronyms down on paper, all the things that you did, and start translating those into civilian speak. Do that now. Go through that exercise now. And when you build your resume or you go to interviews, you're going to be in a lot better spot. So get the jargon right now. All
right. Well, that's a wrap for this session. Go out, make it a great day, and tune in to further sharing in the near future. Like us, share us, do everything you need to do. Let's make sure every veteran and every veteran's loved one has all the opportunities available to them during their transition that could ever be possible. Thanks, y'all.